just very briefly, I will explain, he and his allies made Reformation in Sweden. Of course, some thought that was a good idea, but many didn't think it was such a good idea. The point here, I want to make it, the king ultimately then decided. It was a year process, but then forcefully they made every church, and they disbanded the Catholic Church and made it into Protestant with its new doctrines, etc. It was a big struggle. And then later on with this came also the 30-year war, when Sweden was a part of the war in Europe. For 30 years we were battling between the Northern Europe and the Southern Europe, and that was very emotional, of course, very big, painful struggle for whole Europe, for our country, and view on faith. Sweden basically changed from the Pope to the King, so the King became the ruler of the Church. And for several hundred years, actually, you could not be anything, it was illegal to be anything else than a state Lutheran. Everybody had to be Lutheran. And it was like very much, was more a political system, I would say. And then, so there became all these struggles for the Swedish Reformation. I will turn next slide. But then something happened 100 years ago. In 1925, the Archbishop of Sweden, he felt that after the World War, that religion should have more positive input and stand up for showing that we, despite our differences, our historical conflicts, we should become together and show solidarity and understanding with each other. So he became very famous, Nathan Söderblom. So 1925, he had his first interfaith dialogue session in Sweden, ecumenical conference, inviting Christians, but it was just the Christians at this point. All Christians are coming. The Catholic Church, for some reason, the Church decided not to be part of it. But anyway, there was a starting very important process in Sweden to have ecumenical outreach. And I would say that that is a very strong element in Swedish society. Even among those who are Christian, they feel strong by Christian, but they feel also we have to reach out to other faiths. So this year, the Swedish Church actually celebrated this interfaith meeting of 100 years anniversary in the Swedish Church. They're going to have a big celebration later on this year. For this, also Nathan Söderblom was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. But the struggle is not just between different religions and governments. The struggle has also been ideological, which I think is very important to think about. And we had, because of the authoritarian nature of the religion, the many years of religion, people also, there was some feel of resentment against authority, associated religion with the government control in many ways. So they want to have independence from it. And some started even questioning the whole notion of being religious. So there are two philosophers, Axel Hegerström and Ingmar Hedenius, had an incredible impact in the Swedish society in their way of thinking. So my parents, my mother particularly, she said that they de-Christianized Sweden from an ideological point of view. So Sweden gone from 100 years when we were strong Lutheran, everyone was Lutheran, to basically turning its back on religion. So they rooted their reasoning on science, of course. The science can explain everything, and that's the way we can have order and goodness in society. The question is if it really succeeds. We know that wars, religion is actually to address the struggle between our soul, our mind, and body, and that this is somehow a universal struggle. That's of course why people always turn to religion, is because they find this inner peace, finding this correlationship with relationships between mind and body. It should be in balance, and this affects all aspects of life. So that's why we talk about not only within society, but also religion and the culture. We think we have this seek for balance between our mind and body, but when it's a conflict, there's division and a struggle. Next slide. So this affects the way with relationships. So we're thinking that when people just focus on themselves, they cannot collaborate with other people, of course. So it affects the way we address relationships. The private becomes separate from the public. people taking advantage of each other. So we have these not harmonious relationships, but the struggling relationships because of self-centeredness and greeds. And of course we see this in all conflicts. It starts somewhere. Of course we always think someone else is starting it, but we have to know, so why is this conflict starting and how can we address it on a more fundamental level? Next slide, please. So essence of peace, we'll say, is actually to collaborate the private and the public. There should create a harmonious relationship, working relationship between the private and the public. And so that should reflect also the relationship between the mind and the body. And so it comes this sense of peace is this harmony, which I think we will strive for. And when we talk about peace, we talk about complete peace, not just world peace, social peace, inner peace, peace in our relationships. We can have a harmonious relationship of the private and the public. Next slide. This, of course, affects generally also our culture. So our culture shapes us in many ways, for good and for bad, I say. But the culture's idea is that there are values, and then there are traditions, and there's great fellowship. Of course, we think about this in a church, in a religious community, creates culture, but any type of culture has its inputs. And this idea is with all good culture, is actually should bring unity and harmony. And that's why culture is important, and I think that's a very important instrument when we talk about not only on a personal level, but on a social and a global level. We need to think about what the culture's role to addressing peace. This is not just a political issue, but it's also very much a culture issue dealing with our understanding. And of course, this struggle is a reflection onto our mind and body, and it's also because culture can address the harmony between our internal and our external. When we think politically, they just basically address the external aspect, but culture have the ability to, or should do, address both aspects and bring a harmony between them. That shapes our identity and everything else. To illustrate this, so we say that science emphasizes, of course, the material aspects of life. When we reject religion, we reject something, maybe something very fundamental about ourselves as human and about human lives. And I think this is also an explanation why there are tension and conflicts and stress in our societies and relationships. And I base this also on a scientific discovery, a book from an American Iranian, Albert Mehrabian, and he wrote this book, Silent Messages. It was published in 1971. And he explained communication. So when I communicate, when I speak, you hear my words, and you think that's the essence of our communication. But he realized that actually people don't only communicate and understand each other from based on the words. And this you can ask, of course, any actor, any person who perform. They understand that the tone of the words are actually meant as more important how they express things. But even more important is the body language. So I thought this is very accepted. So I think this model-based communication is actually very valuable for all aspects of life. And I will show you how one can use and think about it. And we can say that the word, and this is typical when we have a naturalistic thinking, we always see the external, the top, we see like the top of the iceberg. And that's what we see. We don't see the underlying other things, like our consciousness and our subconsciousness, our mind, and our history and path. Of course, we think about material objects even like this, they exist because there's certain laws of nature, and atoms and electrons. So they are in the material things, but with many things, how things drives are based on laws, and what makes these laws operate in this way. So there's, of course, a big thing we need to understand of life when we see things that we need to explore. And religion is, of course, a way to explore those things. People tend to think just look at externally. When we look at religion or some culture, we just see the attributes. We look at the attributes. We just see the attributes. But it's what is in their thinking and what are they relating to. This, of course, in the discussion also actually with philosophy. I'm not going to this, but there's a big discussion with this. It is in philosophy. Wittgenstein talked about this, and Frege talked about these things also. Next slide. So, when you have this, what I call the extension model, there is a division between the physical self and our sub-ideological, which affects us, but we don't take that into consideration. And I think that the same thing then, we can use this parallel with religion. So there has been, Christianity is a good example. There have been different doctrines for different reasons, and there's created schisms and conflicts. We don't have only the Catholic and the Protestant, we have the Catholic and the Orthodox, and we have different types of groups around, which cause political strives. I would say that politicians many times also maybe use these struggles for their own interest. So, but if we look at external things, so I think that's why it's important for interfaith dialogue that we tend to look also a little bit more vertically. We just don't look externally at differences, but we try to look at things. The institutions and doctrines maybe just represent one part. Of course, they are holy. They are a very important element of our teaching and our rituals and understanding. But still, they are just one element. There is a teaching behind these elements and traditions, which is important. And they themselves are an expression of something deeper reality. When we talk about the soul, when we talk about the human spirit, when we talk about God, these are words, but they're expressing something very fundamental about human nature. And I think that my experience working with interfaith is that actually it doesn't matter if people are Buddhists or where they come from. If they take their faith seriously, means actually we can understand each other on a deeper level. And therefore, I feel that interfaith dialogue is a very important. It's not, we should not look at, if you look at externally, you tend to look at horizontally. You see them as rivals, which have these elements to it. But we can sort of see ourselves as compatriots. If we think this way, if religious people could think this way more generally, I would think that then religion itself can be a stronger voice for peace and reconciliation in all these areas around the world, and play maybe also a stronger role in our own societies, like society in the Western world, where I feel religious voice has been discriminated. In the West, we talk about anti-nation, but they don't consider how the spiritual element in our society is actually. The voice to address these issues have been discriminated. And with the force of this, we see violence and conflicts. Next slide. So that's why this wall, I said, should be more transparent. It's obviously there, but we should go through and explore these other things. And that will have good effects also on our society. People always think about economics. Economics are very important, of course, but it's not everything. Economics is about relationships, about sharing power, sharing interest. And unfortunately, many times, conflicts comes out of people who want to use economics for their own interest. And there's a hope. If the human soul is corrupted and self-centered, it cannot really make a healthy society and working for the benefit of everybody. So I would say that interfaith can help us to address the essence of lives in our relationships. And that will create the well-being and mutual benefit for everybody. Sociality. And also it's interesting that UNESCO, that's why I like also in the peace work, will address culture of peace. Because this is a proclamation, actually United Nations, UNESCO did it. Einstein discussed with Freud, actually, how can we create peace? And they lifted up this idea of we had to create a culture. In other words, conflict is not just an abolition of war, but we have to go deeper. How can we create the conditions for solving conflict, addressing conflicts? How can we prevent it? So you will make many declarations. But the reality is that even though the government signed this declaration, they didn't address it. They didn't enhance it. And there are many political scientists that say that actually the peace issues have been down-prioritized. And that, I think, also has a great effect on our society and the world today. Next slide. So again, I want to just basically go to summarize that what essence of religion is if we want to see what we have more things in common than what separates us. So religions have the slide became familiar, sorry about the translation. Religion has a great responsibility to contribute to a peaceful society in the world, where we can learn to collaborate with each other. And next slide. And I illustrate that in three aspects, like health, for instance. A healthy being, your mind and body is united. You feel good, you eat well, you have health. Health issue is actually not only as a biological issue, but it's also a spiritual issue, and they are connected with each other. In the same way, with the next slide, in a gender issue, the relationship between man and women, is also a lot of struggles and a lot of abuse, and we have problems in the families. So religion, of course, needs to address these issues. And they are not just religious issues, they are actually social issues in a sense, how to promote a better world. And the next kind is also the environment issue. Many people will talk about the environment, how should we take care of the environment? We have to learn to collaborate. Humanity has a common responsibility to address these issues. And the environment is not only the biology aspect, but it's also the environment we create through our culture, which impacts our thinking, our lifestyles, our sense of priorities. So that's how if we have good balance, we can create this culture of peace. Next slide. So these are some points where religious teaching can help to promote certain awareness on peace and human responsibility. And we're dealing with hate and human development, serving people, family, society, and promoting a positive view of human nature. So the conclusion is that what this is that we learn, we learn from other religions, and we might understand better what the essence, what it means to be about human nature. So I not only learn because I can see something about my own faith in other people's faith, I can see maybe what is actually genuinely universal. And we do that by engaging ourselves with diverse beliefs, open our minds and heart. So interfaith dialogue stands as a powerful model for cultivating peace and mutual understanding for the rest of the society and the world. Interfaith dialogue should be a very central piece, I would suggest, in creating a more peaceful world. And I think this also in itself speaks for why we need this dialogue in the world, because we human beings are spiritual beings. We seek human development and fellowship. There's a lot of talk about science, what AI can do, what these things can do. It can scare us. Some people are very concerned. Technology development can help us, but it also can undermine us. And we see this in society. Technology development can be for surveillance, for war, to oppress people, but it can also be a tool for developing ourselves. So it develops how much our mind, how we can find balance between our mind and our body and our internal and external aspects. So next slide. So I think that's it. Thank you so much. So we're going to have two speakers. And I think the next speaker we have on the schedule is Venerable, is that on your slide there? Venerable Dr. Kabucha Udarakita. I'm sorry to pronounce your name. Udarakita. Venerable Dr. Kabucha. Welcome.
Thank you, very well, Ajahn Dr. Bonfim Torsey, for inviting me here, and all the World Peace Organizers, World Peace Organizers of Sweden, invite me from Canada.
Because the master turned to put it there.
This peace award. I came to Sweden, such a lovely country, in 2008, and spent 3 months with